Welcome to Thursday of Holy Week. Lots going to happen before the sun rises tomorrow. Traditionally, today is known as Maundy Thursday. Maundy is the Latin word for command. It's attached to this day because in John's story of this Last Supper, he focuses on the washing of the disciples' feet and then Jesus giving a new command in John 13:34. A new command I give you, says Jesus, love one another. As I have loved you, you must love one another. By this, everyone will know you are my disciples if you love one another. The day begins, though, with Jesus sending two disciples to prepare a room where the group will celebrate the Passover meal. It's during that meal that Jesus creates what we call the Last Supper or communion. We're having a live virtual communion service this evening, so I'm not going to focus on that in this video. Judas left the meal early to meet up with a detachment of temple guards who will arrest Jesus. Later in the meal, Jesus again predicted his impending death and that all of the disciples will run away. Peter declared he would never betray Jesus or deny Jesus, and even if he has to die with Jesus, he will never fall away. Jesus told him, before the sun is up, you will deny me 3 times. After the meal, they go to the Garden of Gethsemane, where they have gone most nights to pray this week. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John aside. He asks them to specifically pray with him. And Jesus himself offers an impassioned plea to his Father to allow this cup, this moment of death, to pass by, if it is possible, but only if the Father wills it. As they prayed, Judas arrived with that detachment of temple guards. These are not men who have been in conflict with Jesus all week. These are the Jewish temple soldiers sent by those men. So they need Judas to be there to identify Jesus, which is what he does when he kisses Jesus on the cheek. Chaos ensues as the men arrest Jesus. The disciples flee after a scuffle in which one of the 12, that John says was Peter, grabbed a sword and cut off a servant's ear, while another slipped out of his clothes to escape naked. Finally, Jesus tells everyone, calm down. And Jesus is led away to the first of a series of trials. Peter lurks in the shadows, follows them to a courtyard outside the high priest's house. First trial is before the court of the Sanhedrin. The way the trial is depicted in the gospel, it's not a real trial. According to Jewish law, an official trial by the Sanhedrin could not take place at night, could not take place during a festival. Witnesses had to be heard individually, and no witness could be present to hear another witness so that there wouldn't be any collusion or changing of testimonies. If the verdict of the court was death, then a night had to pass before the sentence could be carried out to give the court a chance to fully consider the weight of their decision. Well, Jesus is tried at night on the eve of Passover with witnesses shouting contradicting testimonies over each other, and he's executed a few hours after the sentence was passed. In Mark, the trial begins with witnesses standing up and accusing Jesus of threatening the temple and a bunch of other crimes. But none of their statements agree, and some even contradict each other. Jesus, even when the high priest yells at him to defend himself, remained silent. Finally, unable to get witnesses who can convict Jesus, the high priest just directly asks Jesus. This is what happens in Mark 14, verses 61 to 65. The high priest asked him, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? I am, said Jesus. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. The high priest tore his clothes. Why do we need any more witnesses, he said. You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? They all condemned him as worthy of death. Then some began to spit on him. They blindfolded him, struck him with their fists, and said, prophesy. And the guards took him and beat him. The high priest, on hearing Jesus' answer, tears his clothes and accuses Jesus of blasphemy. Tearing of clothes was a typical gesture to express distress or outrage, and it is a fitting response when one hears blasphemy. But what was so terrible about Jesus' answer? It was a short sentence, but it is filled with theological content and a whole new understanding of the Messiah. This is the first public acknowledgement by Jesus that he is the Messiah. That may or may not have been enough for the chief priest to cry blasphemy, but Jesus then goes on to talk about the Son of Man. Son of Man comes from a vision in Daniel chapter 7. There, Daniel has a dream of 4 beasts who rise up in succession to make war on the people of God. Each one is worse than the one before until finally God, who Daniel calls the Ancient of Days, exercises judgment, removing their power and destroying the beasts. In the wake of that judgment, Daniel sees another ruler coming from the clouds of heaven. This ruler is not a beast, but one who looks like a son of man. He looks human. Daniel 7:14 says, "This son of man was given authority, glory, sovereign power. All nations and people of every language worship him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed." When Jesus uses the term Son of Man, he was making reference to this passage of prophecy. Daniel never specifically identified who the Son of Man is, and it's not immediately clear that this is a messianic title or person. But Jesus made some important claims as he first claimed the title of Messiah. He said, "I am," but then added to Messiah the title Son of Man. He said, "You will see the Son of Man at the right hand of God." Sitting at the right hand of God in the throne room of heaven it's not just a way to say that this is God's choice to be king or ruler. This is a claim to have divine power, which can be used in heavenly realms as well as over the earth. That he is coming in the clouds means Jesus was claiming to have the divine right of judgment and that he has come from heaven and he will be the judge at the end of time. The high priest was trying to provoke Jesus to simply claim to be Messiah, but Jesus goes far beyond complaint and claims divine power and authority. If it's not true, then Jesus is a foolish blasphemer. But if it is true, which we believe as followers of Christ that it is, then the high priest was a foolish blasphemer. Look at Jesus for a moment through the eyes of that priest. What did he see? Standing before him, a peasant, a carpenter from Galilee, who was easily taken into custody because one of his own followers betrayed him. Every other follower has abandoned him, and he's now standing before them, chained, ragged, and beaten. He is the image of helplessness, of powerlessness. If you were standing at the foot of the cross a few hours later, it would look even worse. But in the midst of that court, and at the foot of the cross, Jesus says we see the power of God revealed, and it is revealed in his suffering and his weakness. Jesus, the Messiah, was far less than what people would have expected. He never raised a finger against anyone and willingly submitted to death. Anyone expecting a Savior who would exercise mighty force, perform miraculous feats, or speak powerful prophecies will see none of that. God's power is revealed in weakness and in suffering. As Isaiah wrote, he was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. And the punishment that brought us peace was on him. By his wounds we are healed. I'm reminded again of Jesus' words in John, "By this everyone will know you are my disciples if you love one another." The power of God shown in his people is not shown in great displays and amazing shows. The power of God is revealed in his people as they love one another and in each small act of kindness and compassion and care. Love one another as I have loved you, and by that all people will know you are my followers. Even Jesus' 12 disciples had a hard time understanding the significance of God's power displayed in suffering and in compassion. While Jesus is on trial, declaring himself to be the Son of Man, Peter's outside, swearing to a servant girl that he never met Jesus in his whole life. As he does this, the sun begins to crack the horizon. A rooster crows, and Jesus is being dragged off to meet Pilate for the first time.